Member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a great honour to rise in this House today at this late hour to be one of the final speakers on what I think is a very important motion about a very important issue. But I think it's important to begin by acknowledging the brave men and women of the Canadian Forces, and especially the Royal Canadian Air Force, for all that they've done in the mission to this point. But I think it's also important to recognize the families and the loved ones of those members of the Canadian Forces. You know, when our brave men and women are deployed, so often it's their loved ones, their families who are back at home, manning things at home and keeping the support there for their loved ones when they're overseas. So their families and their loved ones are owed a great deal of respect and thanks as well. Canada's men and women in uniform are called upon to travel to some of the most hostile and uninhabitable places in this world to protect the most vulnerable, to fight terrorism, and to promote Canadian values. The Canada we have today would not be this great country if it wasn't for the past sacrifice of the brave men and women who've worn our uniform. You know, I wanted to say how pleased I was that the government was actually bringing this debate to the House, because I believe it is important that we have a fulsome debate on a military deployment. And I believe that was the convention that was ingrained in this great parliament by our previous government. When important military issues were to be undertaken, they were brought to parliament. They were brought to parliament to be debated and to be voted upon. And so I was initially pleased that the government was bringing this to the House, only to find out that as they were presenting this motion, they had already ended the CF-18 mission.
Shameful.
It's disingenuous at best, Mr. Speaker, and it's disappointing that they would break this convention that this great parliament has set. Canada must not be a passive player on the world stage. We must and we should be a global leader in the protection of human rights and in the fight against terrorism. We must stand up for the rights of people suffering around the world and stand against those who would commit horrendous and heinous acts against the most innocent in our societies. Canadians are frankly disappointed with their government and the steps they've taken away from the important mission against ISIS. In fact, last July, the member from Niagara Falls, previously the Minister of Foreign Affairs, hosted an international meeting here in Canada of those nations who are contributing to the fight against ISIS. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs hosted that meeting. Fast forward to this recently in Paris, there was another such meeting of our allies who are undertaking the mission against ISIS. Canada wasn't even invited. We went from hosting the meeting to not even being invited. This, Mr. Speaker, seems to be an emerging trend with this Liberal government when it comes to their foreign policy. I find it interesting that the Prime Minister and the Liberals often claim that their first act of coming to office was to propose a middle-class tax cut. But the fact of the matter is that wasn't their first act. Their first act was for the Prime Minister to call up President Obama and say that he was withdrawing our CF-18s from the fight against ISIS. That was his first foray into international relations and international politics, was to withdraw from the fight. Canada must continue to play an important role in Iraq and Syria against ISIS. You know, Mr. Speaker, upon hearing the news of our withdrawal of the CF-18s, Jabbar Yawar, Chief of Staff for the Kurdish Regional Government's Peshmerga Ministry, said, and I quote, "It is bad news for us. Canada was a major partner in the coalition, and it was a great help to us in Kurdistan." Mr. Speaker, Canada is abandoning our allies in the region. The decision to withdraw Canada's CF-18s is nothing more than the fulfillment of an ill-conceived campaign promise. But what's most troubling is that neither the Prime Minister nor the Minister of National Defence, nor frankly any member opposite, has really provided an explanation as to why or how withdrawing our CF-18s is actually helpful to our international allies. The government's new course is not the best strategy to combat ISIS, and it is hurting Canada's reputation on the world stage. What is more confusing, Mr. Speaker, about this position the government has taken is that while they oppose the CF-18s actually carrying out any actual bombing, under the plan being put forward, Canadians and Canadian aircraft will still participate in refueling of planes and identifying targets for the international coalition. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals want the benefits of appearing to withdraw, but still want to be in the fight as well. you can't have it both ways, Mr. Speaker. When historians look back at how Canada and how our forces contribute to the fight, I think they will find this particular point of us wanting. I think withdrawing the CF-18s will serve to be a major point of contention and a disappointment going forward. In November 2015, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum released a report that ISIS had committed genocide against Iraq's Yazidis population. It found that ISIS fighters had carried out crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and war crimes against other minorities. Why is this government choosing to turn its back on the face of such evil? And while some members across the way are hesitant to use the word genocide, that's exactly what it is. And that's exactly why Canada and our CF-18s should be part of the fight. In fact, Canadians continue to support this viewpoint. Recently, on February 6, 2016, an Angus Reid poll found that 63% of Canadians would like to see Canada continue the bombing mission. In fact, some would like to see it even further and further enhance our bombing mission. The Canadian public understands the importance of the fight against ISIS and being actively involved in the CF-18 mission. We can also be extremely proud of the men and women of the Air Force. In fact, recently, Colonel Sean Boyle, who commanded the Air Force Task Force for Iraq between April and October 2015, recently confirmed that Canadian bombing missions did not lead to any civilian casualties. Mr. Speaker, this speaks volumes to the skill and professionalism of our brave men and women in uniform. Why would the Liberal government want to withdraw our most effective fighter pilots instead of actually commending them and giving them a vote of confidence for the hard work and the skill with which they have participated in this mission thus far?
Good point.
Taking our CF-18s out of this mission is a further step in reducing our standing, Canada's presence on the world stage. Much like they are doing in an effort to seek to normalize relations with Iran, this government is damaging our reputation abroad. If we are not willing to take a firm stand against nations and terrorist groups who commit horrendous acts like ISIS, we will no longer be respected to the degree we are on the world stage. Further, Mr. Speaker, since 2012, our previous Conservative government committed $1 billion in humanitarian development and stabilization aid in the region. This is part of a multifaceted approach to fighting ISIS. Not only the military effort with the CF-18s, but also humanitarian and development assistance for those on the ground. But we cannot deliver humanitarian aid if we are not providing the military support. We cannot build for peace where we are not willing to fight for peace. Canada must show that we are willing to stand up for our values and our freedoms. Our freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly and association, the equality of women, and the rule of law. Canadians understand the importance and the responsibility of the responsibility to protect. It is not enough to simply talk about rights and freedoms. We must be willing to defend the defenseless when called upon, not just in words, but with force when necessary. Mr. Speaker, when dealing with a group as evil as ISIS, force is necessary. I'm proud to stand in this House and oppose the motion put forward by the Liberal government. Withdrawing our CF-18s at this time shows a lack of confidence of that side of the House in our brave men and women of the Canadian Forces. I am proud to stand with the men and women of the Royal Canadian Air Force and commend them on all they have done thus far in the fight, and I would encourage the government to reevaluate the proposal and leave our CF-18s in the fight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions? The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Mr. Speaker, I know that Mr. Speaker, that the Conservatives is having a difficult time understanding and appreciating the fact that the Liberal government, through a campaign period that lasted quite a number of days, talked a lot about withdrawing the F-18s, refocusing the mission. And then on October the 19th, the Canadians voted overwhelming to give a majority government to the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker. We are fulfilling an election commitment. There is no surprise to the global coalition that's there. Mr. Speaker. They're very much aware. We are refocusing and we're putting in efforts in areas that I think are very responsible. We have an incredible Canadian forces, and we pay a great deal of gratitude and appreciation. We have some of the very best in the world. We're going to have some of the best training missions that are going to be out there. We're going to have great humanitarian aid that's going to be going. There's a lot of things in which the government has actually committed. The world and the coalition is quite happy with Canada's role, as it has been quoted. The question I have for the member, why won't the Conservative Party recognize that there's more than just the F-18s? And if the World Coalition has accepted it, why won't the Conservatives accept what the Canadians voted for on October the 19th and what the rest of the World Coalition has already said that they're quite content with Canada's role?
The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member from Winnipeg North for his question. It's nice to hear him speak in this House from time to time. But I would just go back to the fact that recently Angus Reid polling found a survey that found that 63% of Canadians actually support our continued bombing mission. But more to the point of the question, we can do both. We can provide humanitarian assistance and we can continue the CF-18 mission in the region. We can do both, and in fact, it's almost incumbent upon us to do both. Absolutely. We cannot deliver the humanitarian assistance, the humanitarian aid, and the stabilization in the region, and the diplomatic assistance, if we're not providing the military assistance as well. I'm proud of our government's past associations with our international allies, and our allies are relying on us. I've yet to know of any of our allies who've said, you know what, we don't need your CF-18s. Pull them out completely. Right. Fact of the matter is, they would prefer that they're there. For sure. And the U.S. task force commander in the region for the Air Force has said as much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Questions? The honourable member for Esquimalt, Saanich Sooke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And earlier the member for Scarborough-Guildford suggested at this late hour in the debate, maybe we need a little comparison. And for New Democrats who think we'd be more effective in cutting off the flow of funds and arms and foreign fighters to ISIS, I look at the core of this motion, and it's a military mission that looks very much like the old Conservative military mission. In terms of the bombing, we're doing everything except using F-18s to do it. We're using our refueling, we're using our surveillance planes, we're painting targets on the ground. And in terms of the training mission, it's an expansion of what the Conservatives already started. So my question to the Conservatives is, do they actually support the other part of this military mission? Do they support the expansion of the training on the ground, which will put more Canadians at risk of direct combat with ISIS? So apart from what we've all heard from you, that you're opposed to taking out the F-18s, do you support the part of this mission that expands the training?
The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member from the NDP for his question. We don't oppose expansion in training missions, for example, or development aid in the region. What we do oppose is cutting and running from the CF-18 side of the mission. We believe that we are best served and that our allies are best served by leaving our CF-18s in the fight, by providing the assistance that our brave men and women in the Canadian Forces and those on the ground require. That's why our government, or our former government, undertook that mission, and that's what we would like to see continued. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.